Good around 3 transformations, and what we're going to do is a back and chest workout today. I'm going to use the cable machine. If you have access to one, great. You can kind of take notes and make this movement pattern at the gym. If not, we can use resistance bands, and the only other thing you're going to kind of need is some dumbbells. You could switch this for bench presses too. So if we're running this with a resistance band to start, we're going to start with lat pulls. Okay, so I'm going to use this for my example. I get this set up, I get my body in an outstretched position, and I run my rows, the lat pulls. It's an angle I realize we're all missing too much, even myself included. I was too focused on, for years, of these rows to kind of try and thicken my back, thinking I'm getting the lats in the same movement pattern, but I'm not. I got to make sure I get that big stretch. Now this goes even for kind of seated rows. For years I was focused because it was said that we want to kind of focus on packing that shoulder. And I realized, while that may be important depending on certain movement patterns, the big thing people aren't doing is working when they're exercising these big movement patterns. Getting the arm out of the socket. I mean, your sartorius attacks to the shoulder blade into the rib cage. Not sartorius, I'm just talking about it. There. Serratus attaches, so it activates on this motion, and all too often we're not doing that motion. It ends up overpowering and kind of distorting our rib cage. So first we're going to start with lat pulls, and as I talked about before, hands are important. We want to make sure our grip is here. Now I've been working with clients for years and understand that people have a hard time gripping, and that's because their shoulder complex gets so tight. I was working with somebody today, and the patterns I realized that end up getting skewered is because of tightness. Her arms are too tight, so it's making her move and pull from the arms. So if I'm taking this weight, I want to just kind of stay hung out here. All too often, I'm doing this. Now everything's right, it's just in the front of the body. It's no longer a row. It's a movement pattern that's based upon the front of your body. It basically turns into arms, in all arms. So we're not transferring our weight into our arm, in this case, back. So when I take a weight, I want to just kind of come all the way down and just kind of let it pull me out of my sockets. My core remains tight, down. Let it pull me out of my socket. And if I want to explode, that's fine. I just want to make sure I let it back up slow. Get my full range of motion. So all too often, a lot of us are allowing or unintentionally shortening our ranges of motion. That's going to create scar tissue. It's not going to allow a full movement pattern. Do it with one arm so people can see that angle. Because you want to make sure we're getting big, we're coming down just underneath the chin, okay? Angles in the arms are important, okay? Sometimes if we're too tight, we're here. Now that works, but that's just a different movement pattern. So every time you change your angle, if I go here, that's a whole different exercise. It targets the body in different. We want to make sure that we're targeting all these different areas, but we got to understand if our tightness is restricting us from doing the movement that we want. So I'm going to go into one that I kind of liked and I did the other day for a warm-up. So I'm going to go press, out, and over the head. It's not an overly hard exercise, but I want to warm up my chest first. Kind of get all the fibers going. So I'm coming down, up, and back. The whole time, I'm pushing the weights together. So I'm basically combining a pullover with a close grip press. So I want to keep the weight moderate because I don't want to sacrifice my range of motion on this part just to push more weight on this part. when I come up over the head too, I'm trying to specifically get my arms out of the socket as much as I can. I'm trying to increase that range of motion. I used to work it as a pack, and I realized, again, the folly in a lot of these things. Now, if I was using a really heavy weight, then yes, I'd want to make sure I do that. But because I'm working my range of motion more than I want, so you got to understand kind of what are you exercising for. Are we going for power? Are we going for strength, mobility? Mobility should be at the forefront of everybody's, in my opinion. So I'm just going to do some here. You guys can see this. You can see my hips are tight, so they're throwing me off, so I'm going to go 2 legs. You could be doing the same thing too with one arm. It's just a little bit harder with the resistance band to get those angles. That's why I like that one arm or two arm that I showed you in the beginning with the resistance band leaning over. If you have questions about it, you can check one of my other videos where I demonstrate it, because I was specifically looking for a way to get people to work a lat pull that are exercising from home. So they may not have access to a lat pull machine. So resistance band are your next best thing. The other option is running a TRX. TRX is really, again, great for that. So we're going to come back in. Again, pushing those weights together. Breathing. So I inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Now I really only focus on the inhale on this going back one, because that's the harder of it. And for the most part, I don't really gotta focus on my breathing, but doing this more for everybody else, because that's a huge, again, component of exercise is making sure that our breathing, it's the #1 cause for people having a hard time with heavier weights or just movement patterns in general, is that timing of the breathing, timing of the mechanics of the movement. I've known that for years. I just didn't know how to fix it or help a lot of people with it. Now that I understand tightness and how it affects our bodies, it's very easy to see how somebody wants to do something like this, which is not very good for a lat pull. Okay, that's all in the arms. And for years I was trying to guide people with their movement patterns. And so if you are having trouble with the lat pull, there are a couple, the hard part is diagnosing really what it is. Are the arms too tight? Is it the shoulder that's too tight? Those are all things that I can see, and I know once I see them, whether it's somebody's arm, shoulder. That's usually what I'm doing with my clients. I'm checking to see what and where their restriction is. And with the percussion therapy, I had a client earlier today, didn't get to her left arm, but fixed the right arm. It took me about 20 minutes to get better range of motion. But then the other part, once that flexibility is there, is teaching the muscle memory. And that's what they mean by muscle memory, is that the body recognizes movement patterns. Even if it hasn't done them in a while, it'll recognize them. You can start doing them again. So that'll help me getting back into shape here. That's a great exercise too for lower parts of the chest, getting that stretch. Okay, so pec minor, pec major as well. So I'm going to keep the lat pulls in for myself. Different ways that we could do this at home though is we could go into 2-arm row, okay, keeping it higher. I guess I'll demonstrate it this way too. I'll just run it that way. So resistance band would be high. Angles matter. So I want to make sure, slightly leaning back, the heavier weight that I take, the bigger angle I can take. Now that's harder with the resistance band, unless you get some really thick one, heavy ones. So what you want to do is kind of lean back, core tight. Now I can go with my palms down or palms together. Palms together is much easier. This is a much harder row, mainly because of the timing and the tightness in people's shoulders. I understand now. I didn't quite understand it for years, but this one's much more common movement pattern. But again, hard part with this is, I did it with a client earlier today. First thing they did was they wanted to do this, hook the wrist. It changes everything. This wrist basically is the movement, okay? Depending on the angle I choose to take, just like in martial arts, depending on the angle I take, it's a weak angle or strong angle. And that's how I break everything down. Everything is all on angles. What is the best angle to take? Get the movement or exercise that I'm looking for. So again, I want to reach, let myself around a little bit, pull, letting those shoulders out of the socket. Again, make sure you use a weight that's comfortable for you. Now we could substitute push-ups for any of this stuff. I'm going to stick with the weights for people who might struggle with push-ups. I'm going to go into a traditional chest press. I'm going to show you an option for hand placement that's helpful for people who struggle with it. So traditional, I'm here, my wrists are straight. So even for me, my left one has gotten tighter over the years, and I realize I got to work on it. But if you struggle, we're going to go here. Pressure's just sitting on that thumb, coming down, hands inside the elbows. Okay, here, down by the xiphoid, coming up. Make sure your elbows stay underneath the weight. Okay, huge, huge on this. If those elbows are not underneath,